Chapter 1306. Seal. The black figure froze as it released its grip on Bernadette's neck. It was as though it was staring at Queen Mystic with its non-existent eyes. A dry, hoarse voice echoed in the concealed space.
Home.
This voice was filled with hesitation and confusion, as though it was seeking confirmation. It was as if it had come from another world. The corrosion that Bernadette encountered vanished. Her connection with the sealed artifact was instantly restored. Pale death once again ate at her vitality, little by little. This helped her resist the chaos in her thoughts, maintaining her basic clarity and rationality. Just as she was about to say something, the black figure suddenly stretched out its palm. But this time, it didn't strangle Bernadette's neck, but instead, it pushed her hard. Following this push was the collapse of the concealed space. It was a voice filled with pain, as though it was resisting something.
Leave.
As the voice echoed, the black figure vanished. In an instant, it appeared on the huge, black, high-backed chair in the middle of the platform. Two cracks appeared on its face, as though two asymmetrical eyes had grown out. However, the eyes didn't have any pupils. It was blood-colored. Right on the heels of that, another crack appeared beneath the two eyes. They, too, were filled with a pure blood-red light. This allowed the black figure to finally open its mouth. It faced Bernadette as obvious sounds of pain resounded around it, as though it was resisting something.
Leave this place.
After being pushed out more than 10 meters away, Bernadette easily found her footing. However, she didn't follow the voice's order by leaving the Black Emperor's mausoleum. She stood there, staring blankly at the central platform. As she looked at the black figure, her expression revealed an unspeakable sadness. She could sense and now confirm that the black figure was her father, the man who called himself Caesar, Roselle Gustave. In the next second, more cracks appeared on the black figure's body. They ruptured from top to bottom, blooming blood-red flowers in different parts of his body. This made Roselle look like he was left with a shadow that wrapped around a blood-red object that emitted pure light. When Klein saw this scene above the gray fog, he naturally thought of the crimson moon high in the sky. At that moment, Roselle seemed to have transformed into a shadow. He wanted to block the crimson moon, but openings ruptured from his body, allowing more and more moonlight to shine into the real world. When these openings were connected together, the black shadow would completely split apart and give birth to a brand new crimson moon. When that happened, something extremely terrifying would definitely happen. At that moment, Roselle's black figure turned much more illusory, as though it had become an illusion. This made him look like he had been isolated in another world. There was an invisible barrier between him and the real world. Then Roselle raised his right arm with great difficulty and pinched his forehead. The frequency at which blood-red cracks appeared on his body instantly decreased to a nadir. However, the eyes that had already appeared blinked repeatedly. However, this didn't bring any negative effects on the surroundings. It was as though it was just a simple change of order. The new growth of blood-red cracks was constantly being distorted to its original state of only having gradual activity. After completing this, Roselle raised his head and looked at Bernadette, who was dozens of meters away. He said with a hoarse voice,
You really have become an important figure in the mysterious world. You managed to come here alone. Come over, let me see how my little princess has grown.
Bernadette's eyes reddened as she took a step forward. Roselle laughed again.
Back when I made sketchbooks, textbooks, and invented all kinds of small games for you, you were just a tiny midget. Now, you're able to save your poor old father. I remember that you liked the clothes I designed for you when you were young. Unfortunately, you can't wear layered dresses after you're an adult.
The Emperor rambled on as if he had arrived in his twilight years and was someone who enjoyed reminiscing about the beautiful past. Bernadette walked faster and faster. Above the gray fog, Klein frowned indiscernibly. Suddenly, Emperor Roselle lowered his head and said with great force,
Stop!
His voice carried an indescribable pain. Bernadette was stunned for a moment before she slowed down and stopped. She looked at the dark figure, and her eyes gradually revealed an indescribable sadness. Roselle raised his head again and coughed lightly.
Didn't you really want to ask why the Black Emperor's mausoleum has to be engraved with the order one implemented and the style that one ushered? In fact, this wasn't necessary. I just wanted to let anyone who sees it remember my greatness.
Before he could finish his sentence, the Emperor gripped the armrest by his side tightly. He suppressed his voice and said in extreme pain,
"Don't come near me. I've been corrupted."
The sadness in Bernadette's eyes deepened. Her guess had finally been confirmed. At that moment, the red cracks on Roselle's face began to turn chaotic. They closed and opened randomly with no signs of having a unified will. The Emperor took the opportunity and straightened his body. He looked at Bernadette and shouted with great difficulty,
"Seal me."
"Seal." Queen Mystic Bernadette repeated the word silently. Her blue eyes quickly turned moist as a faint mist enveloped them. Even though she had lived for many years and was no longer the little girl she had been in the past, she was still unable to contain her emotions. However, she didn't ask for the reason, nor did she hesitate. With just a slight struggle, she firmly raised her right hand and pressed it on the pale white metal mask. She calmly made a decision, just like how she had faced all the major events that happened on the element Dawn over the years. On the surface of pale death, the metal instantly turned soft as it reformed into a new face with two black eyes. In the deep black parts of the eye, white lines appeared, forming an extremely complicated and mysterious three-dimensional symbol. It was like a long feathered bird or a coiled feathered serpent. The symbol absorbed the surrounding light and quickly turned corporeal. Then it separated from Bernadette's eyes and extended its body before flying towards Roselle Gustave on the iron-black chair. Along the way, the strange symbol caused the surroundings to become increasingly dim. The floor tiles and stone walls suffered another round of weathering as if the deity in charge of death had passed the final judgment. The falling rubble and flying dust followed the corporeal symbol and came to Roselle's side. Then they coiled around him, enveloping the illusory black figure that seemed to exist in another world. During this process, Roselle failed to control himself several times. He attempted to leave the iron-black chair, but he ended sitting back down. He didn't resist the seal that Bernadette had exerted on him. As the symbol fused with his figure, he immediately had a connection with pale death. He saw the illusory deity that lorded over the countless undead and the swollen body of a water ghost loitering in a dark river. Roselle's aura immediately vanished as the cracked red openings closed one after another. What awaited the Emperor was a quiet and peaceful sleep. As for the symbol, it was sealed within Roselle's body, constantly influencing him until pale death stopped responding. In the blink of an eye, several blood-red cracks appeared on Roselle's body again. After his aura declined to a nadir, it gradually began to glow as he fought back against the corporeal symbol. Klein, who was above the gray fog, sighed when he saw this. He clenched his fist and pressed it against his mouth. The curtain he draped around himself suddenly rose up, and the entire Sapphira Castle boiled over in an obvious manner. Silently, the aura of new life that Roselle had just obtained began to dissipate. After vanishing to a certain point, it gained new life once again. Then it was affected by the pale death and continued to fade away. Using the power of the Attendant of Mysteries Beyond her characteristic and Sapphira Castle, Klein directly grafted new life and death and skipped the process in between. The corruption that Roselle suffered was no longer able to recover to the extent needed to break through the pale seal. Following that, Klein extended his right hand and used the power of Sapphira Castle to draw out the mysterious symbol behind the fool's high-back chair, the mysterious symbol made up of the pupilless eye and the contorted lines. The symbol absorbed the aura of Sapphira Castle and quickly turned corporeal. With a wave of Klein's wrist, it entered the prayer light representing Bernadette and landed on Roselle's black figure, fusing into his body. Every time the grafting vanished, this symbol that was directly related to the Fool in Sapphira Castle would draw upon new powers and complete the grafting process once more. As he constantly passed away and gained new life, Rozelle's face, which seemed to be a pure shadow, obtained facial features. Then, he looked to the top of the mausoleum as though he was looking into an infinite height. He then retracted his gaze and looked at Bernadette. He said with an abnormally weak voice,
"This seal is good. I can sleep in peace."
With that said, he frowned slightly as his tone changed.
"Who taught you how to dress like this?"
Bernadette felt a little lost as she listened. It was as if she had returned to her teenage years. At that time, when she had dressed up to the nines for a ball held by other nobles. Rozelle would use a similar expression and a similar tone to pepper her with a series of questions. The mist in her eyes became obvious, and she could no longer control herself. She lowered her voice and shouted,
"Daddy."
Rozelle's facial features immediately turned gentle before tensing up again. He sternly said,
"Leave and never return."
Bernadette opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but her vision went black as though she could see the shadow of order. In the next second, she found herself back at the edge of the primitive island. Bernadette stared blankly at the mountain peak in the middle of the primitive island for a few seconds, before slowly turning around and walking towards the sea. This time, she didn't stubbornly insist on walking straight without looking back. Every few steps she took, she would stop and turn back to take a look. Soon, she returned to the dawn and entered the captain's cabin. She opened the room that was specially used to hold her collection. At a glance, Bernadette saw books, stacks of textbooks, clothes, and skirts. She saw the chess game that few people in the world knew and the neat pile of wooden block toys. She leaned against the wooden door, slowly curled up, and sat on the floor. She raised her head to look at the dark sky outside the captain's cabin and pinched her lips with her right thumb and index finger. She whistled a melodious tune. It was a gentle, sweet, and sad melody that could calm people down. As the melody echoed, water beads fell from Bernadette's face and dripped onto the floor. After an unknown period of time, the captain's cabin was filled with a suppressed whimper.
"Daddy."
Chapter 1307, Meeting, in the middle of the primitive island, in the Black Emperor Mausoleum. After sending away Bernadette, Rozelle didn't immediately fall into a deep sleep. He slowly raised his head and looked up once again into the infinite distance. Above the gray fog, Klein sighed silently. He put down the staff of the stars and grabbed a paper figurine before shaking it. With a smacking sound, the paper figurine rapidly thickened and expanded before flying into the translucent vortex formed from illusory mysterious symbols beside the fool's chair. Although Bernadette had already moved to the edge of the primitive island, and Klein could no longer see the situation inside the Black Emperor Mausoleum through the prayer light. However, he could use the symbol of the Fool that had merged with Rozelle's figure to maintain a connection with the Emperor, up to a certain extent. After the paper figurine passed through the slowly spinning vortex, it descended into the dim mausoleum, which had an unknown light source. It then turned into a human in front of the central platform. This human's black hair and brown eyes were somewhat similar to Gehrman Sparrow's, but he didn't have clear-cut features. The lines weren't deep enough, and his bearing wasn't cold enough. There were also certain differences in his facial features. His chin and stomach had a small amount of fat induced by an indulgent society. It was Klein's original appearance as Zhou Mingrui, the Zhou Mingrui, who had been hanging inside Sapphira Castle for thousands of years beside Rozelle Huangtao Gustav. Rozelle wasn't surprised by his appearance. With one hand on the armrest, he leaned forward slightly and said,
"You're here."
"I'm here."
Klein nodded indiscernibly.
"You shouldn't be here."
Rozelle sighed.
"I'm already here."
Klein very naturally participated in completing the meme populated by a popular Chinese novel by Ji Yulong. Having completely confirmed the origins of the fellow in front of him, Roselle returned to his normal sitting posture, chuckling as he said,
I originally planned on asking where you're from to see there's any need for regional discrimination, but after some thought, there's no need for that. We're all anachronistic, miserable wretches without a home.
Without waiting for Klein's reply, the Emperor's voice sank as he asked,
You know the truth about the apocalypse?
Yes.
Klein nodded slightly. Roselle continued asking,
You know that this is Earth?
Yes.
Klein answered frankly. When Roselle heard that, he laughed self-deprecatingly.
You actually learned about it so early. I only dared to confirm it after I went to the moon and saw the true appearance of this planet from high above.
At this point, the Emperor sighed and said,
The moon is bizarre. I clearly felt terror, but I didn't even consider the possibility of being corrupted. Then I became more and more extreme. However, I did occasionally gain a certain level of clarity from the views of people around me, but I didn't dare to write it in the diary in that state. I was afraid of exposing secrets and losing my final chance. I eventually decided to use all the groundwork I did previously to switch to the Black Emperor pathway. Apart from the impending apocalypse, with Sequence Zeros being the only ones capable of protecting the people they wish to protect, they can hide them in other planets in the vast universe and use the corresponding authorities to rebuild a set of order for humans to survive in desolate lands. I also saw the hope of escaping my corruption by using the Black Emperor's ability to resurrect. As long as I became a Sequence Zero Black Emperor and was truly killed after turning half crazy, I'd have the chance of resurrecting in the mausoleum or in the astral world. When that happened, what would return to me would be a pure uniqueness and 3-sequence 1 beyonder characteristics. I wouldn't be tainted at all, nor will I contain an uncontrollable madness. Speaking of which, I made use of the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery to a certain extent back then. But the horror of the great old ones far exceeded my imagination. Accompanying my revival was a new life of corruption. Perhaps only great old ones can resist great old ones. I could only terminate the revival process and live such an ignoble existence in my final mausoleum to prevent the great old one from using my body to be born in the real world. That would have brought about a devastating disaster.
Klein had long guessed Emperor Roselle's condition based on what he knew and what had just happened. He wasn't surprised at all as he calmly replied,
The one who corrupted you is called the Mother Goddess of Depravity. She has bewitched many believers as the embodiment of the primordial moon.
The facial features that appeared faintly on Roselle's face immediately changed. He fell silent for a few seconds before saying,
I know the primordial moon, but I didn't know that. Her true honorific name is the Mother Goddess of Depravity. Now that I think about it, my discovery of Mr. Door's cry for help might not have been a coincidence.
Upon hearing this, Klein was alarmed. He instantly recalled the situations happening off-island. He had some sort of premonition about what Emperor Roselle was about to say. Roselle laughed and sighed.
The biggest problem in the first half of my life was that I was too confident. I always had the feeling that I could reload a save file and redo things. I didn't pay enough attention to the details. Back then, Grimm was corrupted by the strange powers on this island. He returned here after dying and regained new life. Isn't this the influence of the primordial moon? After I finished all sorts of investigations and did the corresponding purifications, I felt that I was fine. But in fact, fate might have undergone a tiny change at that moment. This resulted in me encountering Mr. Door later, and was slowly guided to the moon by him. You can't blame Mr. Door. His condition might be worse than mine.
Does the Emperor mean that he has been targeted by the Mother Goddess of Depravity the moment he discovered this primitive island?
Klein sighed.
At that time, who would have thought that the problem would be so serious?
Before Sequence 2, understanding the cosmos and the great old ones led to terrifying corruption. And without understanding it, one wouldn't be able to accurately determine how serious the problem or what kind of patchwork was needed subsequently when faced with certain situations. This made Roselle treat this primitive island as his secret base, thus not informing existences that had the right to understand the outer deities, great old ones, and cosmos.
That's right.
Roselle seemed to be very gratified that he had committed a mistake that almost anyone would make. He then said,
In that ancient and secretive organization, there was almost no mention of the great old ones or outer deities.
At that moment, Roselle paused for a moment before saying,
You should have read my diary. You should know what the ancient and hidden organization represents.
Klein nodded.
I know which organization it is referring to. I never expected that you wouldn't dare mention the name of his organization after having the level of a sequence 0.
I have a nagging feeling that he isn't simple. He might have an understanding of the outer deities that far exceeds our imagination, so it's better to be more careful. After all, I'm not a complete sequence 0 true god.
After Roselle said this simple sentence, his brow suddenly furrowed.
How much of my diary did you read?
If the atmosphere wasn't that heavy and sorrowful, Klein would definitely find it irresistible to reply with the taste of a demoness ain't bad as a way to tease his fellow earthling. Finally, he replied calmly,
Plenty.
After saying the word, he casually added,
I even found a few cards of blasphemy.
Which ones?
Roselle blurted out. Klein controlled the paper figurine's expression from above the gray fog and said in a flat tone,
Black Emperor, Tyrant, Red Priest, and the Fool.
Phew.
Roselle exhaled as the faint crease on his brows eased.
Thankfully, it's not the demoness, the moon, and the mother card.
You had to mention it yourself.
Klein didn't respond as he looked at the Emperor without a change in expression. After Roselle said that, he realized something and hurriedly coughed.
Well, we've all watched live streams, so you should know very well how normal it is to cross-dress.
As he spoke, he coughed again and sighed.
Which pathway are you from?
Seer.
Klein replied succinctly. Quirin. Roselle immediately fell silent. After a few seconds, he said,
Unfortunately, if everything is fine and dandy, you should be responsible for pulling out a large-screen television and a game console from the historical void. We can chat while playing. That's a romantic dream of us men.
Unfortunately, there's no electricity. I have to rely on you to invent it.
Klein didn't voice out his thoughts. He maintained his tone and said,
I hope such a day will come.
Then he pulled the topic back on track.
I'm very curious why the card of blasphemy you created can't even be found by deities. Such a level of anti-divination and anti-prophecy is amazing.
Roselle immediately chuckled.
It's because knowledge can bring power, and power can also bestow knowledge. This is the authority of a knowledge emperor. After I infused the potion formula of the 22 pathways with power, they naturally produced the convergence powers between Beyonder characteristics. They also gained anti-divination and anti-prophecy effects to a certain extent. And then...
As he spoke, Roselle suddenly paused, as though he had sensed something amiss. After 1 or 2 seconds, he said in an ethereal voice,
The creation of the card of blasphemy was a year before I held the Black Emperor ritual. Back then, I had already suffered the corruption of the primordial moon, and I didn't have the corresponding realization most of the time. Why can the 22 cards not be found by deities?
Upon hearing this question above the gray fog, Klein's heart tightened as he felt his scalp tingle again. Without waiting for his response from the paper figurine, Roselle's voice suddenly raised, bringing with it an indescribable fear.
Don't gather the 22 cards. Be careful of the mother card.
These 2 sentences echoed in the deep interior of the Black Emperor Mausoleum for a long time. Chapter 1308. Goodbye. Above the gray fog, Klein's pupils instantly widened as he subconsciously looked down at the long modeled table in front of him. There were 4 cards of blasphemy with different patterns on the back. At that moment, he felt a little scared and relieved. He felt as though he had been wandering about on the edge of the abyss while blindfolded, but he never fell. If he had done his best to gather all the card of blasphemy, or had obtained the mother card, with the way how he liked to put the different cards in his body to obtain the corresponding levels and special characteristics, he might have already been corrupted by the mother goddess of depravity, or be pregnant with something.
However, I'm not Roselle. Even if I have the mother card, I probably wouldn't have done so. Furthermore, in order to prevent the deities from finding it, cards of blasphemy are extremely difficult to gather. It's almost impossible to gather all of them. From the looks of it, this is a casual arrangement made by the mother goddess of depravity. If anyone were to unfortunately obtain the mother card, they would become one of the latent dangers in this world.
Klein retracted his gaze and continued using his stand-in paper figurine substitutes to look at Roselle Gustav, who was sitting on the black iron seat. At that moment, Roselle raised his body slightly. His voice was sometimes low and sometimes high-pitched.
Everything has godhood in them. The oldest one is still alive in everyone's bodies.
Klein frowned slightly. He didn't know if the one speaking was Roselle, or the crimson moon in his body. Not only did he have a certain level of understanding regarding such secrets, he had also personally experienced it before. Thus, he wasn't that horrified or panicked. He only recalled the teachings of the Aurora Order he had seen in the past. They promoted the belief that the Creator was omnipresent and existed in every living being's body. Therefore, all living beings had godhood. Once godhood reached a certain concentration, they could become an angel. And the current Orthodox deities are nothing more than slightly stronger angels. To ordinary people, as long as one was able to grasp that the essence of life was a spiritual travel and tempered one's mind, strengthen one's spirit, and find their own godhood, as well as fuse with more godhoods, one would be able to escape their mortal coils and become an angel.
Back then, I felt that a cult like the Aurora Order had a complete set of mysticism and religious canon, just like the Orthodox churches. But now, I can interpret the truth underlying these words. From a certain point of view, it's true. The only problem is that after fusing with more godhoods, they might no longer be themselves. The true Creator actually placed the deepest secrets of this world into his teachings. Isn't he afraid that a believer might suddenly have an epiphany and learn of the underground corruption, eventually becoming a vessel for the oldest one's revival? This hangman really is a little crazy. He doesn't have much rationality most of the time.
Klein mumbled inwardly as he waited for Roselle to say more. 2 to 3 seconds later, Roselle, who had been in a cycle of slumber and the obtaining of new life, sat back on his iron-black throne. He panted and didn't say a word. Klein then controlled the paper figurine to say,
"Which of the words that you have just said should be trusted, and which ones should I be wary of?"
Roselle chortled.
Consider the answer yourself. Hey, isn't that how you seers like to speak?
He didn't wait for Klein's reply, as he continued.
When I created the Pale Death Mask, I sensed something. The death of the Fourth Epoch might not have completely perished. He might have left a hidden trump card for being revived. It might involve the River of Eternal Darkness. Heh, death will definitely not die so easily.
With that said, Roselle looked at Klein, who stood at the foot of the platform.
Indeed, only by choosing the Seer, Apprentice, or Marauder pathway can a transmigrator enter Sapphira Castle. By the time I figured out this factor, it was already way too late. I don't know if you want to become a Great Old One or not, nor do I know if this requires a ritual. I can only tell you that this is definitely more dangerous than becoming a deity, countless times more dangerous. Perhaps the existence who stored us and threw us back into the real world is waiting for you there. The only suggestion I can give you is to communicate with the genie of the magic wishing lamp before you make any attempts.
Genie? Using the grudge between him and the celestial worthy to obtain certain assistance?
Klein nodded slightly and said,
Okay.
After hearing his answer, Roselle sighed and said with a smile,
If you really can become a Great Old One, you can consider saving me. Only a Great Old One can resist a Great Old One.
At this point, he fell silent for a moment before he slowed down his speech.
If you can't completely free me from the corruption of the primordial moon after becoming a great old one, then remember to wipe my existence off the face of the world. Destroy this mausoleum, support the creation of a new Black Emperor, and prevent me from ever being revived.
The light inside the mausoleum seemed to dim a little. Klein fell silent for 2 seconds before saying,
I won't forget that.
Roselle fell silent. After a few seconds, he laughed self-deprecatingly.
Of course, before that, you should try to save me a few more times.
Such a sense of humor didn't make Klein smile. Instead, it made his heart sink even more, making him unable to speak. Roselle didn't continue the topic as he recalled.
My wife passed away a long time ago. The mistresses I once had definitely had their own endings. Towards them, I feel very sorry. I've never truly loved them. I only coveted their looks and the pleasure they gave me. I don't have any illegitimate children. Towards such matters, a Beyonder is quite aware of that. As for the time before I became a Beyonder, I believe those ladies definitely coveted my looks and body to enjoy such pleasures. They won't leave any trouble for themselves. My eldest son Ciel should be dead for years. I don't know how many descendants he left behind. My second son Borneva would definitely be an angel now if nothing unexpected happens. I have complicated feelings for him. On the one hand, I'm very detached, disappointed and resentful, but on the other hand, I would occasionally secretly care about him. I remember how adorable he was when he was just born. You've already met my eldest daughter, Bernadette. Isn't she beautiful? She was pretty from a young age, obedient and smart. She knew how to be filial to her old father, protect her younger brother, and dote on her mother. Sometimes she acted especially righteous and appeared a little silly. There were several times when I secretly cheated while playing chess or games with her, but she didn't realize it. Such a temper made it difficult for her to accept what I did later. Of course now, I can just push the blame onto the primordial moon. It's all because of her corruption. I'm rather grateful for her on this point. I don't know what right I have to make a request. After all, I've never helped you before, nor do I have much of a relationship with you. It's just that we're from the same era and same place. The ties as a fellow Earthling.
Upon hearing that, Klein said in a deep voice,
Your diary gave me plenty of help. It allowed me to grasp a lot of high-level knowledge when I was weak, allowing me to avoid many dangers and know how to direct my efforts in a targeted manner. Also, those cards of blasphemy have shown their use at different stages.
Roselle coughed lightly and said,
Can you not mention the diary? However, in the later stages, I was indeed consciously leaving a message to the next transmigrator. The only thing I couldn't be sure of is which language you know.
The Emperor slowly exhaled before saying,
My request is to help me look after Bernadette. When she needs help, provide her some help. Although she is about to become an important figure in the mysterious world, I still can't feel at ease as a father.
Without any hesitation, Klein got the paper figurine to answer directly.
I'll take care of her for you.
Man, why does this sound a little awkward?
Roselle's tone instantly turned odd.
By the way, I haven't asked for your name. As for me, you should know very well that I'm Huang Tao.
Zhao Ming Grui.
Klein answered frankly.
Are you married? Do you have children? How old are you?
Roselle raised 3 questions in one go.
Emperor, why are you acting like a gossipy middle-aged woman from next door?
Klein shook his head and gave a simple answer.
No.
Roselle immediately fell silent. After a moment, he said,
You and I are of the same generation. Bernadette should call you Uncle Jew, yes.
As he spoke, Roselle's tone suddenly became filled with pity.
After coming to this era, I treated everything as a game in the beginning. I was having a great time playing, but I would occasionally recall my home, remembering the past where I cultivated most of my personality and hobbies. The longer I lived, the higher the frequency I felt this feeling. It's like the fallen leaves will always want to return to the roots of a tree. However, at the very least, I have a daughter, a wife, and 2 sons. There are still many things in this world that I'm worried about, and some sense of belonging to a certain extent. As for you, I can feel your loneliness, the loneliness that comes from deep within your bones.
Upon saying that, Roselle suddenly sighed.
If only we were still living in that era. I'll go to work punctually every day, and work overtime from time to time. Whenever I'm free, I'll visit my daughter's extracurricular lessons, pick her up, bring her home stuff my wife constantly reminds me about. Every weekend we'll either head out for some fun or head to my parents' place to accompany them. When one day I'm exhausted from life, I'll use an excuse that you as my friend are treating me. As men, we can sit by the street and eat some skewers, drink some alcohol, brag, curse our superiors, reminisce about the days of our youth, and urge you to quickly find a girlfriend. When I wake up the next day, I'll be able to have the zeal to continue facing life again.
Klein listened quietly without interrupting the Emperor's prattle. Roselle's voice gradually lowered as he smiled.
Goodbye, my friend. I hope we can really meet again one day.
His figure quickly turned illusory, as though he had disappeared from the world, leaving only a faint shadow hovering over the iron-black throne. Roselle Gustave had returned to his eternal slumber. Chapter 1309, Additional Lessons. After circling the primitive island 3 times, the dawn finally made its way off into the distance, which was perennially covered in storms. Bernadette slowly retracted her gaze and fixed it on the sage frontlet that remained suspended in the air. As a clairvoyant, she clearly saw the opportunity to advance. She knew that she had completed the corresponding ritual, preventing a disaster that involved a higher order of power. However, the price she paid was to personally seal her father, the father she had missed and sought for more than 100 years.
How ironic.
Bernadette looked at the vertical eye embedded with diamonds and sighed softly. After leaving Intis, she had 2 big wishes. First, she wanted to investigate the truth behind the matter and see if she had misunderstood her father. Second, she wanted to follow her father's footsteps and see if there was a possibility of reviving him. Bernadette had already fulfilled her first wish. The truth was that she had indeed misunderstood her father. This curtailed her pain and conflicted feelings. Her hatred for her father had completely dissipated, but it also added to her guilt. With this kind of guilt and yearning all this time, she tried her best to fulfill her second wish, but the outcome wasn't pleasant. If there hadn't been any hope from the beginning, she might not have had such a huge reaction. However, she had clearly seen the light and seen her father, but she had no choice but to personally place him into a state of slumber. After a moment of silence, Bernadette's slightly unfocused eyes became clear again. Cosa, she no longer hesitated and no longer blamed herself. She no longer had all kinds of negative emotions. She firmly raised her right hand and drew out ancient words that shimmered with a stellar radiance in the void. She summoned the spirit world creature who was half man, half wind, and she retrieved the sage supplementary ingredients from it. As for the rest, as there was no need for them to be specially preserved, they were in the collection room of the dawn. Not long after, Bernadette used pale death to shatter the sage frontlet. She concocted the potion that could allow her to advance to sequence 2. Looking at the bubbling sage potion with each bubble containing a transparent eye, Bernadette firmly raised her right hand and brought the glass bottle to her mouth. She knew that what she needed at this moment wasn't sorrow nor corny emotions, but determination and the will to forge forward. This was because if she wanted to help her father, Emperor Roselle, escape the corruption and completely revive, she needed a higher sequence and greater strength. Because of this, she was willing to bury the pain in the deepest part of her heart and not let it affect her mental state. It was only when there was no one around at night that she could retrieve it and savor it alone. With the sage potion entering her mouth, Bernadette's body turned illusory at a discernible pace. She broke down into thick and complicated knowledge, changing into an existence that was a flux of information. The entire dawn, as well as the surrounding winds, storms, lightning, seawater, and waves, all lost their sense of reality. It was as though they had been restored to the most fundamental blocks of information. For most of Sequence 3 Beyonders of the Mystery Prior Pathway, such a state was extremely dangerous. If one's willpower wasn't strong enough, their luck wasn't good enough, and they weren't prepared enough, the knowledge that they had transformed into would be infiltrated by all kinds of information within seconds. They would be washed away, assimilated, and thus quickly lose consciousness. They wouldn't be able to reassemble their bodies, turning into a very strange and difficult monster to deal with in mysticism, a knowledge demon. This was also known as an information creature. Bernadette had relied on the sage frontlet and had previously transformed into a flux of information on several occasions. Although it was limited to 2 to 3 seconds and didn't last too long, it was still considered experience. At that moment, she tried her best to maintain her consciousness and establish a connection with the information produced in the spirit world by preventing a high-level disaster. The information had a clear imprint belonging to her, and it involved a very high level of power. It was exceptionally solid and couldn't be dispersed by other information for short periods of time. It helped her to stabilize her consciousness and slowly gather the dissipating flux of information around her body. During this process, Klein, who was above the gray fog, tapped the edge of the long modeled table with the help of the prayer light. He used a miracle invoker's ability of changing the probability of certain developments and actions to a certain extent, and he bestowed Bernadette with a certain amount of good luck. Time ticked by. There were several times when Bernadette wavered on the border of losing consciousness, but in the end, she managed to tide through it. She gathered all the information that belonged to her and began to reconstruct her body. At that moment, she gradually felt the concern Admiral of Stars Cadlia had for her. She felt the members of the Element Dawn and her crew making their daily prayers. This stabilized her condition better, allowing her to resist the ancient will that was slowly developing in her body. At this moment, a series of secret information came from nowhere. Taking the opportunity while Bernadette was reforming her body, it attempted to fuse with her. This was interference from the hidden sage. As an embodiment of this world's knowledge and information, as a quasi-sequence zero existence of the mystery prior pathway, the hidden sage had a certain influence on beyonders of a lower sequencer than him. Without giving Bernadette the chance to use the pale white mask, the curtain draped over Klein gently rose. Space-time distorted around Bernadette, completely isolating her from the outside world. Even information couldn't be interchanged. Grabbing this sudden moment of peace, Bernadette completely reassembled her body and used her own anchors to balance out the terrifying will that was surfacing in her body. At that moment, she had truly become a she, a Sequence 2 angel of the mystery prior pathway, an important figure in the mysterious world that could be addressed as a secret existence. Right on the heels of that, she saw the distorted space around her return to normal. She saw a series of hidden information surging towards her. She stretched out her right hand and grabbed the information with ease, extracting the useful information contained within. Just as Bernadette was about to return to reality from the spirit world, an orange light suddenly bloomed in front of her eyes. The light instantly condensed into a fat elder with a short white beard. The elder smiled and said, "Ma'am, I'm Orange Light Hilarion."
Orange light.
Bernadette was puzzled. She didn't understand why Orange Light Hilarion had suddenly appeared in front of her. They hadn't interacted much before. As the leader of the Element Dawn and a former mysticologist, she wasn't unfamiliar with the 7 lights of the spirit world. She even knew how to pray to 7 lights, as well as the ritual needed to receive the corresponding advice. She knew that the 7 lustrous lights were a symbol of the spirit world, and they contained endless knowledge of different domains. They were definitely at the angel level. Orange Light Hilarion added with a smile, "A great existence wants me to inform you of the knowledge regarding the great old ones, the outer deities, and the cosmos, so that you have a relatively accurate grasp of the state of this world and the corresponding corruption."
Which existence is it?
Bernadette asked, puzzled and cautious. She had vaguely guessed the answer, but she still found it quite unbelievable. After all, the 7 lights in the spirit world were also important figures in the mysterious world. even if a sequence 0 true God wouldn't find it easy to get them to do their bidding. Orange light, Hilarion chuckled and replied. The greater ruler above the spirit world.
The great ruler above the spirit world.
Bernadette repeated the honorific name, and her thoughts raced. Hilarion glanced at her and smiled. He also has another title, Mr. Fool. Somewhere out at sea, the future, which was cruising on a safe sea route, Kalia suddenly jolted awake from her dream as her forehead was covered in cold sweat. In the dream just now, she saw the queen lying on the ground drenched in blood. Her chest was torn open, and a baby-like monster crawled out of it. As a mysticologist who had advanced with a drop of the snake of fate's blood, Catalea believed that her dream wasn't without any reason. It was definitely a premonition. It was obvious that the dream she had wasn't pleasant. Point tootin', while feeling uneasy, Catalea sat up and put on her cloak. She attempted to pray to Mr. Fool, hoping that this mighty existence would give her some hints or to protect the queen. Soon, a scene appeared before her eyes. Queen Mystic Bernadette walked out of the spirit world and returned to dawn, allowing the ship to gradually distance itself from the nameless island. Catalea immediately heaved a sigh of relief and sincerely thanked Mr. Fool. After finishing her prayer, she opened the window of the captain's cabin in joy, causing starlight to condense into a long bridge that reached the deck. She put on her heavy glasses and walked along the resplendent bridge of starlight to the deck, where she proceeded to stroll leisurely in the quiet night. When she arrived at the bow of the ship, Catalea saw Frank Lee tinkering with bottles.
What are you doing?
Catalea subconsciously frowned. Frank looked up and said with a bright smile,
My ideas encountered a setback, so I can't proceed any further for now. I asked Nina to get me some soil from the bottom of the sea to study the microbes in it.
With that said, Frank Lee said, with a look of anticipation,
When I have my next vacation, I'd like to go to the depths of the North Sea, or the poles where it's a world of ice and snow. There might be many ancient microorganisms buried beneath the thick layer of ice there, from the 4th epoch, the 3rd epoch, or even the 2nd and 1st epoch. This will bring me plenty.
You won't have any vacations for the time being.
Catalea said inwardly. Klein conjured a box and placed the 4 cards of blasphemy inside. After sealing them, he immediately returned to the real world and headed for the nearest Evernight Cathedral. He planned on informing the Evernight goddess in the form of a prayer of the hidden dangers of the card of blasphemy, reminding her to pay attention to such problems. He didn't want the Earth Mother, Lilith, to obtain the Mother card or the Moon card. Chapter 1310, Envoy. The prayer hall in the Evernight Cathedral was as dark as before. Only the holes on the walls allowed some light to seep in, like stars in the night. Klein sat in a corner that wasn't eye-catching. He took off his tall hat and began praying like a pious member of the congregation. He simply mentioned how Roselle had revived in his last mausoleum and focused on the corruption of the primordial moon. He deliberately emphasized that, in order to prevent the crimson moon within him from being born in the real world, Roselle had chosen to terminate the process of having his Black Emperor uniqueness and 3 Sequence 1 characteristics returned to him. At the end of the prayer, Klein pointed out the hidden dangers of the cards of blasphemy, and he expressed his concerns about the whereabouts of the Mother card and the Moon card. In fact, Roselle only mentioned the need to be careful of the Mother card and didn't mention the Moon. However, Klein knew that the 2 pathways of Earth and Moon belonged to the Mother Goddess of Depravity. Therefore, to be cautious, he specially added the Moon card. This was also the main reason he was worried about Earth Mother Lilith. Compared to most of the 22 pathways, the high sequence beyonders of the Planter and Moon pathway had a huge advantage. That was, that they didn't need to worry about the primordial one from awakening in their bodies. They didn't need to worry about dissociation from approaching the world underground. This was because the beyonder characteristics they possessed didn't directly come from the primordial one, which led to no corresponding mental imprint. However, if they were to directly go underground and enter the Chaos Sea, no matter who it was, they would encounter corruption. It was just that the extent would be different. This advantage was very likely due to the fact that the sanguine ancestor Lilith was more special than the other ancient gods. After all, she didn't need to divert a large part of her energy to resist the will of the primordial one awakening within her. And back then, the invisible barrier protecting this world was still sufficiently sturdy, separating the mother goddess of depravity and the other great old ones from Earth, making it difficult for them to exert too much of an influence on the situation inside. But with the passage of time, this advantage gradually became a problem. As the underground corruption became weaker and weaker, the invisible barrier also became weaker and cracks began appearing. Under such circumstances, Earth Mother Lilith's situation became worse. This was because she was facing the intrusion of the mother goddess of depravity that was ever increasing in potency and terror. In this aspect, the original creator, the oldest one who was dead, was definitely inferior to the living mother goddess of depravity. Considering how outer deities who had transcended sequences had an influence on beyonders from their own pathway, Klein felt that he couldn't afford negligence on such matters. After he finished his prayer, he waited for nearly 5 minutes. After confirming that there was no response, he stood up, put on his wandering magician's tall hat, and walked out of the cathedral that belonged to the Evernight. To him, this was mainly a disclosure obligation. As for what the Evernight goddess planned to do with it, or if she would remind him of certain matters, it was beyond his control. In short, Klein could only temporarily believe that the Evernight goddess knew the relative importance of matters. Backland, at the Harvest Church south of the bridge. The top-hatted Emlyn White got off his carriage and looked at the sun covered by the clouds and mist. On the way to the entrance of the cathedral, he gently rotated the ring on his left hand, as if to flaunt his identity. The ring was semi-translucent in color, as though it was made from light red amber. There was a blood-red gem embedded on its tip, a reward Emlyn had received a long time ago, Lilith's ring. After becoming a demigod, Emlyn could suppress the effect of bloodthirst from the ring to a certain extent. Every day, he only needed to drink 3 bottles of human blood to be immune to the corresponding negative effects. Therefore, in order to showcase his special identity as the ancestors blessed, he began wearing this ring permanently. After entering the Harvest Church, Emlyn automatically removed his top hat. At this moment, Cosme, Ernest, and the other sanguine in Backland, who were waiting for Bishop Yutrovsky, stood up one after another. Looking down at the aisle, they greeted softly, "Good morning, my lord." Emlyn looked ahead and nodded indiscernibly.
Is Mistral still not here yet?
Count Mistral set up a chapel at home.
Ernest simply explained. Chuck, Emlyn didn't comment on this. He walked forward and casually said,
He will still have to come when Mass is held.
He looked around before saying,
Where's Bishop Yutrovsky?
The bishop is waiting for you behind. The church's envoy has arrived.
Ernst controlled his facial expression as he answered Emlyn's question politely. The church's envoy. Emlyn rotated the light red ring on his left hand and walked to the back of the cathedral. Soon, he saw Father Yutrovsky and the slightly curly black-haired envoy of the church with a tall nose and deep eyes. Father Yutrovsky introduced the envoy to Emlyn.
This is the Archbishop, His Grace Loreto.
He stood by the window, blocking most of the light.
Good morning, Your Grace.
Emlyn replied with the etiquette of the Church of Earth. Loreto smiled and spoke in rather awkward Loanese. There's no need to address me as Your Grace. Although you aren't an archbishop, you have the status of an archbishop. From today onwards, you will be a hierophant, a high-ranking deacon of the church. You will be in charge of the sanguine matters in Backland. Without giving Emlyn any time to digest this information, Loreto continued. I came to Backland under the Holy See's orders. I'll tell you everything that needs to be taken note of within the church.
Please speak.
Emlyn suppressed his glee and said politely, Loreto's expression immediately turned serious. First of all, the most important point is that, be it the clergymen of the church or the believers of the Earth Mother, as long as you claim that you have obtained a revelation, they are individuals who have been enticed by demons, with no exceptions. If anyone reports something like this to you, or if you have obtained a revelation personally, please inform Bishop Yutrovsky as soon as possible and report it to the church. Father Yutrovsky didn't mention this before. This request sounds very strange, as though there's some suspicion. Emlyn frowned as he looked at Father Yutrovsky, who was standing by the window.
The bishop never said anything about taking note of such matters.
Before he finished his sentence, Emlyn suddenly realized that he came off as criticizing Bishop Yutrovsky, but he couldn't find any better explanation in his haste. Almost at the same time, he understood what was odd about what Archbishop Loreto had said. This was telling everyone that the Earth Mother you sensed isn't the real Earth Mother. This is saying that a large number of the revelations us sanguine receive from the ancestor are fake. It's from demons or evil gods. The look in Emlyn's eyes sank as he tried to maintain his composure. At this moment, Loreto didn't mind and smiled. Bishop Yutrovsky didn't tell you because he didn't know either. Father didn't know. In that instant, Emlyn actually felt a little sympathetic towards Bishop Yutrovsky. He felt that as a Phasacian, a hierophant who had changed faith in his later years, he had been ostracized by the other members of the Church of Earth. Sensing the change in his gaze, Loreto added, "That's because he's a blessed. He doesn't need to care about the temptation of demons and evil gods." Bishop Yutrovsky nodded and said calmly,
The revelations of Earth Mother are in her Holy Bible, in those lines of teaching. Anything other than that is heresy.
Emlyn was somewhat puzzled, but he couldn't think of any question. He grunted and said to Loreto,
Then what is the second point that needs paying attention?
Loreto made his expression turn serious. If you receive a revelation, don't blindly believe it. Please immediately seek confirmation from Bishop Yutrovsky.
Why?
Emlyn was puzzled. He sees home megid. This was basically telling him that the only response he would receive was either from evil gods or demons. Loreto deliberated over his words and explained in detail. In this world, there are many evil existences. They will pretend to be deities and bewitch the clergymen in an act of enticing believers. That's because the two main pathways of the Church of Earth Mother are related to life. Therefore, the effects they receive are more severe than the other churches. From time to time, there are people who will take the wrong path and attempt forbidden life experiments, thus slowly degenerating. In order to prevent such a development, we reorganized the Church a long time ago under the guidance of the Mother's will to establish the system of a favored and blessed. Emlyn's understanding of the Church of Earth was limited to the Holy Bible and part of the Scriptures. He was momentarily at a loss. He had never taken the initiative to ask Father Yutrovsky about the Church of Earth Mother. Loreto glanced at Emlyn and nodded slightly. The favored are clergymen who have won the Mother's favor and are from the two pathways of Earth and Moon. The blessed refers to people who have obtained the Mother's blessing and are from other pathways. The latter is less affected by the demons and evil gods. It can help us verify the authenticity of the revelations. Under such circumstances, even if it's a decree issued by the Holy See, there has to be at least a second-in-command favored. Otherwise, it can be regarded as null and void. As he spoke, Loreto took out a document and unfolded it in front of Emlyn. Apart from what the Archbishop had just said, it included the details of him accepting the mission and appointment as an envoy, age. At the end of the document, there were a few names. The first was from the Holy See of the Church of Earth, Matriarch Roland, and the rest were all names that Emlyn didn't know. He barely recognized the last one to be Father Yutrovsky. As Emlyn mumbled to himself,
Father Yutrovsky's handwriting is really ugly.
He began to have a strong sense of doubt regarding the blessed and favored system.
Why were the blessed less enticed by evil gods or demons? Why were they able to verify a revelation but the favored couldn't?
As his thoughts raced, Emlyn suddenly noticed a detail.
The blessed aren't from the two pathways of earth and moon. Therefore, the problem didn't lie in the favored, but the two pathways themselves?
Emlyn vaguely felt that his guess was the truth.